Hello everyone, hope you're having a beautiful day. Today, we're stepping into a quiet but powerful moment between James and Diep, one that starts with a red ow dye, a look that says too much, and a possibility neither of them dares to name out loud. But just as that warmth begins to feel real, the shadows return. A message from James's father, a suspicious presence nearby, and a warning that turns romance into risk. If you're ready for a story filled with tenderness, tension, and choices that could change everything, stay with me. And if you enjoy this kind of emotional storytelling, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. For one breathless second, James forgot how to breathe. Diep stood in front of the mirror, wrapped in a red ow dye that caught the shop's warm light like a steady flame. Elegant, dignified, the kind of red that didn't shout but still made the room go quiet. Her hands hovered near her hips, unsure. Her eyes lifted to his, and James felt the world narrow to one color, one person. "Is it too much?" she whispered. "It's not too much," he said, voice low. "It's you." Diep's fingers pinched the sleeve. "Red feels like a promise," she admitted, "and promises scare me." "Then don't call it a promise." James stayed where he was close enough to be present, far enough to let her breathe. "Call it a mirror, just a chance to see yourself the way I see you." The seamstress drifted toward the counter, pretending to organize pins, giving them privacy without making it obvious. Diep blinked hard, fighting emotion she didn't want to show. "Why are you looking at me like that?" James answered with a kind of truth that didn't demand anything. "Because I can't stop imagining you beside me," he said. "Not now, not tomorrow, just someday." Her voice came thin. "I'm not used to being someone's someday." "You should be," he murmured. "You've survived too long without being held gently." Diep looked away, afraid she'd break, and James remembered why he'd brought her here in the first place, quietly, carefully, like he was carrying something fragile. Earlier, he'd waited at her gate as the afternoon softened into gold. No teasing, no big entrance, just his steady presence. When she asked why he was early, he'd only said, "Enough time," and guided her to this small shop tucked on a calm street. Now she faced the mirror again. "What if I'm not strong enough for a ceremony?" she whispered. "For people watching, for expectations?" "Then we don't do it that way," James said, certain. "If there's ever an engagement day, it won't be for them. It will be for you, for us, for peace." Peace landed in her chest like warmth she didn't know she was allowed to keep. Diep turned her head slightly, the red catching the light. "So why red?" she asked, quieter, not resisting anymore, just trying to understand. "Because red isn't only a celebration," James said. "It's courage. It's the color you wear when you decide you're allowed to be seen, and still not be ashamed." A tear slipped free before she could stop it. James didn't wipe it. He didn't assume the right. He only offered a tissue from his pocket, held out like an offering. Diep took it with trembling fingers. "You make me feel like I'm allowed," she whispered. "You are," James said. He glanced toward the counter, voice careful again. "May I?" "Permission, even now." After her small nod, he spoke quietly to the seamstress. A drawer opened. Something simple appeared in his palm when he returned a modest red ribbon hair clip, neat as a secret. "This isn't a ring," James said, watching her face. "It's not a claim. It's not a promise you have to carry." He lifted it slightly. "It's just a reminder that today happened." Diep stared, bracing for pressure and finding gentleness instead. "You want me to keep it?" "Only if you want to," he said. "No meaning unless you choose one." Slowly, Diep reached out and closed her fingers around the ribbon. "I'll keep it," she said, voice barely there. "Not as a promise." James stayed still. Diep lifted her eyes to his. "As a possibility." Diep didn't change out of the red Ao dye right away. She stood there a few more seconds, staring at her own reflection like she was learning a new language, one where she didn't have to shrink to fit. James stayed quiet, hands loosely at his sides, watching as if any sudden movement might scare the moment away. "Turn," he said softly. "Just once." Diep gave him a look that tried to be annoyed, but it cracked into something shy. She turned a little, the fabric moving like a calm wave. The seamstress pretended not to smile. When Diep finally stepped behind the curtain to change, James exhaled like he'd been holding his breath all day. His phone buzzed in his pocket at the same time. One message, no name saved, only a number he'd memorized the way you memorize danger. "Dad, call me, now." James's jaw tightened. The shop suddenly felt smaller. Diep came out in her everyday clothes, folding the Ao dye carefully into the garment bag the seamstress handed her. She noticed his face immediately, as she always did. "What is it?" she asked quietly, as if raising her voice would make it worse. "Nothing," he lied too fast. Diep didn't push like a stranger would. She stepped closer like someone who knew where his fear lived. "James," she said, not loud, not sharp, just real. "When you get that look, it's never nothing." He stared at her for a beat, then slid the phone back into his pocket without answering. "Not here," he said. "Let's go." Outside, the air had cooled. The sky was turning that bruised blue that comes right before night when streetlights start to blink awake. James guided her down the sidewalk, his shoulder slightly in front of hers, not controlling, just shielding. Diep hugged the garment bag to her chest. The red ribbon clip rested in her pocket like a secret heartbeat. They reached the corner where the road widened. A motorbike rolled past too slowly. A dark car sat parked with its lights off, engine idling low enough to feel like a hum under the world. James's eyes flicked to it once quick, precise, then away. Diep followed his gaze. "Do you think?" "I don't know," he said, "but I don't like it." He steered them toward a small cafe that still had its metal gate half open, the kind of place that stayed awake for people who needed quiet. They sat in the back, far from the window. James ordered tea neither of them really tasted. Diep set the garment bag beside her and looked at him across the table. "You didn't bring me here just for a dress," she said. James didn't deny it. "I saw your phone," Diep continued, voice steady even though her hands weren't. "It's your father." James's stare hardened, then softened again when he looked at her. "He thinks he still owns my choices," he said. "He thinks he can call and I'll run back into his shadow." Diep's throat tightened. "And will you?" "No." The answer came sharp, immediate, like a door slammed shut. Then he lowered his voice. "But he's dangerous when he feels ignored." Diep's fingers curled around her cup. "Are you in trouble?" "I'm being careful," James said. "I'm finding what I need, proof, enough to stop him from hurting people the way he's always done." His eyes lifted. "Enough to stop him from hurting you." Diep flinched at her own name in that sentence. "You shouldn't say it like that," she whispered, "like I'm already part of your war." James leaned forward, his voice turning gentle again. "You're not a weapon," he said. "You're not a shield. You're the reason I don't want to lose myself while I'm doing this." Diep swallowed. "And if being near you makes me a target?" James didn't look away. "That's why I won't rush you into anything public," he said. "No announcements, no pictures, no noise. If we ever get engaged, it will be when I can stand in front of you without dragging my father's darkness behind me." Diep's breath trembled. "And what if I can't wait that long?" James's hand moved halfway across the table, then stopped, still asking permission without words. Diep placed her fingers lightly against his. Just a touch, a yes, a small one, but real. "I didn't say I wouldn't wait," she murmured. "I said I'm scared." "I'm scared too," James admitted, "but I'd rather be scared with you than numb without you." The cafe's light flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the dark car rolled forward a few feet, then stopped again. Diep's voice dropped. "What do we do now?" "We finish this day," James said. "We get you home safe. And we keep this." His gaze flicked toward her pocket, where the ribbon was hidden. This possibility, quiet, protected. Diep let out a shaky laugh that wasn't really laughter. "You talk like love is evidence." James's mouth curved barely. "Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe it's the only thing that proves I'm not becoming him." When he walked her to her gate later, the night was fully set. He waited until her door clicked shut before turning away. Diep stood inside with her back against the wood, heart pounding. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the red ribbon clip. For a moment, she pressed it to her lips like a prayer. Then her phone buzzed. One new message. Unknown number. Red suits you. Don't let him pretend it's safe.
Diêm đưa Diệp đến một tiệm may nhỏ nơi cô thử một chiếc áo dài màu đỏ, và khoảnh khắc ấy lặng lẽ thay đổi cuộc đời cô. Diệp nhìn cô với vẻ kính trọng, không hứa hẹn điều gì để gây áp lực, tặng cô một chiếc kẹp duy băng đỏ đơn giản như một biểu tượng dịu dàng của khả năng. Tuy nhiên, sự ấm áp bị gián đoạn khi Diệp nhận được tin nhắn từ cha mình nhắc nhở anh là quá khứ vẫn còn níu kéo. Bên ngoài, họ nhận thấy một chiếc xe khả nghi và rút lui vào một quán cà phê yên tĩnh, nơi Diệp thừa nhận anh đang thu thập bằng chứng để vạch trần những hành vi sai trái của cha mình và bảo vệ Diệp khỏi trở thành mục tiêu. Diệp sợ hãi sự nguy hiểm khi anh ở gần anh, nhưng họ chọn cách gần gũi thận trọng. Không có những bước đi công khai, chỉ có hy vọng được giữ kín. Sau đó, Diệp trở về nhà với niềm hy vọng mong manh ấy, cho đến khi một số điện thoại đã nhắn tin cảnh báo rùng rợn về chiếc váy đỏ.